Am I live? Oh dear. Give me a sec. I should have a better handle on this, but you know what? Just switching from Twitch to YouTube, it's not too bad. Maybe just being a bit more aware. I think I'm live. I think I'm good. Hold on. Mic test. Mic test. Mic test again, just cause background noise. Alright, everything seems to be going a-okay, which is great. Okay, so we are back today with Worm. We're on Arc 2, 2.4 specifically. Well, Arc 2, Chapter 4 of Arc 2, Insinuation 2.4. I gotta admit, I know the high school chapters kind of give a lot more. Sorry for my voice, a little bit stuffy. Sinus issues. But you know what? It's not too bad. I have a whole bunch of water with me, I have some tea with me, and we're just gonna see how it goes. But yeah, I don't know. Like, don't get me wrong. I think the high school bits of the story kind of help with the giving some context as to how she, like, you know, how shit Taylor's life is, honestly. But like, you know, like, I don't know, it's just not my favorite bits. Okay, I just kind of like it when they push the world building a lot more. That's always pretty fun, you know. Yeah, this isn't my favorite bit. I just saw the first couple of words on 2.4, and yeah, okay, let's just get into it. And if I really can't take it, I'll just stop it, and then we can just have a little discussion about what we think about it. Okay, so Insinuation 2.4. Nobody likes her. Nobody wants her here, Julia said. Such a loser. She didn't even turn in the major project for art last Friday, Sophia responded. If she's not going to try, then why is she even coming to school? Despite the way the conversation sounded, they were talking about me. They were talking to me. They were just pretending to talk to one another. It was both calculating in how they were managing plausible deniability, while at the same time they were acting totally juvenile, but pretending I wasn't there. A blend of immaturity mixed with craftiness in a way only high schoolers could manage. I would have laughed at the ridiculousness of it if it hadn't been at my expense. The moment I had left the classroom, Emma, Madison, and Sophia had crowded me into a corner, with 6 other girls backing them up. I was unable to squeeze past them without getting elbowed or pushed back, so I couldn't do much more than lean against the window, listening while 8 of the girls were rattling off an endless series of taunts and jibes. Before one girl was even finished, another started up. All the while, Emma stayed back and stayed quiet, the slightest of smiles on her face. I couldn't meet the eyes of any of the other girls without them barking a fresh torrent of insults directly to my face, so I just glared at Emma, ugliest girl in our grade. They were barely thinking about what they were saying, and a lot of the insults were wildly off the mark or contradictory. One would say I was a slut, for example, then another might say a guy would puke before he touched me. The point wasn't being witty, being smart, or being on target. It was more about delivering the feeling behind the words over and over, hammering it in. If I had had just a moment to butt in, maybe I could have come up with retorts. Maybe I could have killed their momentum. They probably wouldn't get back into the easy rhythm again. That said, I couldn't find the words, and there weren't any openings in the conversation where I wouldn't just get talked over. While this particular tactic was new to me, I've been putting up with stuff like this for a year and a half now. At a certain point, I'd come to the conclusion that it was easier to sit back and take it when it came to most things. They wanted me to fight back, because everything was stacked in their favor. If I stood up for myself and they still won, then it only served to feed their egos. If I came out ahead in some way, then they got more persistent and mean for the next time. So much for the same reason I hadn't fought Madison for the homework she had taken for me. I just leaned against the wall next to the window and waited for them to get bored with their game or hungry enough to leave and go have their lunches. What if she used to wash her face? A Brillo pad? She should. She'd look better. Never talks to anybody. Maybe she knows she sounds like a retard and keeps her mouth shut. Nah, she's not that smart. No more than 3 feet behind Emma, I could see Mr. Gladly leaving his classroom. The tirade didn't stop as I watched him tuck a stack of folders under one arm, find his keys, and lock the door. If I were her, I'd kill myself, one of the girls announced. Mr. Gladly turned to look me in the eyes. So glad we don't have Jim with her. Can you imagine seeing her in the locker room? Gag me with a spoon. I don't know what expression I had on my face, but I know I didn't look happy. No less than 5 minutes ago, Mr. Gladly had been trying to convince me to go with him to the office and tell the principal about the bullying. I watched him as he gave me a sad look, shifted the file folders to his free hand, and then walked away. I was stunned. I just couldn't wrap my head around how he could just ignore this. When he had been trying to help me, had he just been covering his own ass? Doing what was required of him in the face of a situation he couldn't ignore? Had he just given up on me? After trying to help, in his own completely ineffective way, after I turned down his offer for help twice, he just decided I wasn't worth the effort? You should have seen her group fail in class just now. It was painful to watch. I clenched my fist, then forced myself to relax it. If we were all guys, this scenario would be totally different. I was in the best shape of my life. I could have swung a few punches from the very start, caused a bloody nose or two maybe. I know I would have lost the fight in the end, getting shoved to the ground by force of numbers and kicked while I was down. But things would have ended there, instead of dragging on like they were here. I'd hurt physically for days afterwards, but I'd at least have the satisfaction of knowing some of the others were hurting too, and I wouldn't have to sit through this barrage of insults. If there was enough damage done, the school would have to take notice, and they wouldn't be able to ignore the circumstances of a 1-against-9 fight. Violence gets attention. But things don't work that way here. Girls played dirty. If I decked Emma, she would run to the office with some fabricated story, her friends backing up her version of events. For most, rattling to the faculty was social suicide. But Emma was more or less top dog. If she went to the principal, people only take things more seriously. By the time I got back to school, they would have spread the story through the grapevine in a way that made me look like a total psycho. Things would get worse. Emma would just be seen as a victim, and girls who had previously ignored the bullying would join in on Emma's behalf. And she smells, one girl said, lamely. Like expired grape and orange juice. Madison cut in with a little laugh. Again bringing up the juice? I suspected that one had been her idea. It seemed they were running out of steam. I figured it was just a minute or two before they got bored and walked away. It seemed Emma got the same impression, because she stepped forward. The group parted to give her room. "What's the matter, Taylor?" Emma asked. "You look upset." Her words didn't seem to fit the situation. I had maintained my composure for however long they had been at it. What I had been feeling was more a mixture of frustration and boredom than anything else. I opened my mouth to say something. A graceless fuck you would have sufficed. "So upset you're going to cry yourself to sleep for a straight week?" she asked. My words died in my throat as I processed her words. Almost a year before we had started high school, I had been at her house. The both of us were eating breakfast and playing music way too loud. Emma's older sister had come downstairs with a phone. We'd turned down the music, and my dad had been on the other end, waiting to tell me in a broken voice that my mom had died in a car accident. Emma's sister had given me a ride to my place, and I bawled the entire way there. I remember Emma crying too, out of sympathy maybe. It could have been the fact that she thought my mom was the coolest adult in the world. Or maybe it was because we really were best friends that she had no idea how to help me. I didn't want to think about the month that had followed, but fragments came to my mind without my asking. I could remember overhearing my dad berating my mother's body because she'd been texting while driving, and she was the only one to blame. At one point, I barely ate for 5 straight days, because my dad was such a wreck that I wasn't on his radar. I'd eventually turned to Emma for help, asking to eat at her place for a few days. I think Emma's mom figured things out and gave my dad a talking to, because he started pulling things together. We'd established our routine, so we wouldn't fall apart as a family again. It was a month after my mom had died that Emma and I had found ourselves sitting on the bridge of a kids' play structure in the park, our rear ends cold from the damp wood, sipping coffee we'd brought in from the donut hole. We didn't have anything to do, so we had just been walking around and talking about whatever. Our wandering had taken us to the playground, and we were resting our heels. "You know, I admire you," she had said abruptly. "Why?" I'd responded, completely mystified about the fact that someone gorgeous and amazing and popular like her could find something to admire in me. "You're so resilient. After your mom died, you were totally in pieces, but you're still together after a month. I couldn't do that." I could remember my admission. I'm not resilient. I'm not resilient. I can hold it together during the day, but I've cried myself to sleep for a straight week. That had been enough to open the floodgates, right there. She gave me a shoulder to cry on, and our coffee was cold before I was done. Now, as I gaped at Emma, wordless, her smile widened. She remembered what I had said then. She knew the memories it would evoke. At some point, that recollection had crossed her mind, and she had decided to weaponize it. She'd been waiting to drop it on me. Fuck me, it worked. I felt the trail of a tear on my cheek. My power roared at the edges of my consciousness, buzzing, pressuring me. I suppressed it. She's crying, Madison laughed. Angry at myself, I rubbed my hand over my cheek to brush the tear away. More were already welling up, ready to take its place. "It's like you have a superpower, Emma," one of the girls tittered. I had taken off my backpack so I could lean against the wall. I reached to pick it up, but before I could, a foot hooked through the strap and dragged it away from me. I looked up and saw the owner of the foot, dark-skinned, willowy Sophia, smirking at me. "OMG, what is she doing?" one of the girls said. Sophia was leaning against the wall, one foot casually resting on top of my backpack. I didn't think it was worth fighting her over, if it gave her the opportunity to continue her game of keep away. I left the bag where it was and shoved my way through the gathered girls, bumping an onlooker with my shoulder hard enough to make him stumble. I ran into the stairwell, out the doors on the ground floor. I fled. I didn't check, but chances were they were watching from the window at the end of the hallway. It didn't really matter. The fact that I just promised to pay $35 of my own money for a World Issues textbook to replace the one that had already been soaked with grape juice wasn't my top concern. Even if it was pretty much all the money I had left after buying the pieces for my costume. My art midterm was in my bag as well, newly repaired. I knew I wouldn't get it back in one piece, if at all. No. My primary concern was getting out of there. I wasn't going to break the promise I'd made to myself. No using powers on them. That was the line I wasn't crossing. Even if I did something utterly innocuous, like giving them all lice, I didn't trust myself to stop there. I didn't trust myself to keep from offering blatant hints that their powers are spoiling my secret identity just to see the looks on their faces when they realized the girl they had been tormenting was a bona fide superhero. It was something I couldn't help but daydream about, but I knew the long-term ramifications would spoil that. Perhaps most important, I rationalized, was keeping the two worlds separate. What use was escapism if the world I was escaping to was muddled with the people and things I was trying to avoid? Before the thought of going back to school had even crossed my mind, I found myself wondering what I was going to do to fill my afternoon. Okay. End chapter. I don't think that was too bad. Hold on, water break first. Okay. I don't think the chapter was too bad. I don't know. Like when I was younger, I think reading high school-esque books just wasn't my thing. And more importantly, reading high school AU fanfiction was definitely not my thing. I just feel like sometimes when people write, I think once they're out of the situation, like once they're out of high school, how they write it may feel either a little bit dated or it may feel a little bit, I suppose, tropey because of kind of the expressions they use. I know we need to suspend all disbelief because this really is just about a bunch of superheroes and stuff, but I really doubt, or maybe this is just an American thing, right? I'm not sure if it actually happens in the States or whatever, but I'm not sure bullying would look like this. I'm not sure if bullying would look like she didn't even turn in the major project for art last Friday. I mean, and I'm pretty sure people have boundaries about. Maybe this just highlights how much of a dick, she is. Bringing up her dead mom and everything. So, yeah, I think the comments kind of concur, like, oh, this reminds me why I hated high school. And given that this was written in like the early 2010s, Yeah, 2011. I guess I understand why it feels like it's kinda dated a little bit. I'm certain that there's bullying now, of course, and I'm also certain that it takes on different forms now. A little bit more subtle is, I think, what I think it looks like now. But yeah, pretty interesting. I wonder what she's gonna. I mean, I know what she does. Obviously, it's just, I stopped right when I found out what she does, what Taylor does, and I hated it. I hated it because it was the consequences bit. But it's okay. We'll get there. We'll get there in time. Anyways, insinuation 2.5. If you looked at Brockton Bay as a patchwork of stellar and squalor, upper class and lower class with no middle ground, then downtown was one of the nice areas. The streaks. I need water and I need to blow my nose. Just give me 1 second. Sound noise warning. Okay, more water. Okay. If you looked at Brockton Bay as a patchwork of stellar and squalor, upper class and lower class with no middle ground, then downtown was one of the nice areas. The streets and sidewalks were wide, and that meant that even with the skyscrapers in every other lot, there was a great deal of blue overhead. Following my retreat from school grounds, I hadn't been sure what to do. My dad worked an unreliable schedule, so I couldn't spend the rest of the afternoon at home unless I wanted to risk having to explain what I was doing home on a school day. I didn't want to hang around the general area of my school, so that had left me the option of the half-hour walk to downtown or a trip to the boardwalk. Between my morning runs and the previous night's escapades, I had seen enough of the boardwalk, so I decided to head downtown. I didn't want to dwell on the subject of school or Emma, so I turned my focus to the recent message from Tattletale. She wanted to meet, presumably to repay the favor she felt she owed me. I considered the possibility that it was a trap, but I couldn't imagine any angle where it would be. She just didn't have any reason to go after me. The worst case scenario was that it wasn't Tattletale, but that wasn't the impression I'd had. What she said in the message seemed to flow with what I'd seen of her last night. I would be careful, nonetheless. It was perplexing. These guys were, in large part, virtual unknowns. From what I knew of Gru and Hellhound, they were both marginally successful B-list villains who had been barely scraping by. Now both were on a team that was pulling high-profile heists and confounding even the likes of Armsmaster. The two of them seemed totally different in methodology. My bad. Okay, wait. The two of them seemed totally different in methodology and style, and if I was remembering right, both Gru and Hellhound had lived in different cities prior to teaming up and setting roots in Brockton Bay. That raised the question, who or what had drawn these four very different individuals together? It was possible that Tattletale or Regent were the uniting factors, but I couldn't really imagine it, having seen what I did of their group dynamic. Gru had poked fun at Regent rather than treat him like a leader, and while I couldn't put my finger on it, the more I imagined Tattletale uniting that group of unconnected people of powers, the harder I found it to picture. In fact, when I thought about it, hadn't Gru said that they had fought for a considerable amount of time over how to deal with Lung? It really didn't sound like they had any leadership worth speaking about. It wasn't hard to sympathize with Armsmaster. The whole scenario there was just bizarre, and it was made worse by the fact that there was practically no details as far as Tattletale or Regent went. Information, it seemed, was a major factor when dealing with capes. The streets were busy with people on their lunch break. Businessmen and businesswomen were heading to restaurants and fast food places. My stomach growled as I passed a line of people waiting their turn at a street vendor. I checked my pockets and winced at the realization that I didn't have enough for even a hot dog. My lunch had been in my backpack. I stopped myself before I could finish that train of thought and put myself into a worse mood by dwelling on what had happened at school. Still, as I thought back to the circle of villains and Tattletale's message, the amusing thought crossed my mind that I could ask them to repay the favor by buying me lunch. It wasn't a serious thought, but the ridiculousness of the mental image, me eating a burger with a group of supervillains, put a dumb smirk on my face. I was pretty sure I looked like a moron to anyone on the street who happened to glance at me. As I thought on it too, though, the notion that I might actually consider taking Tattletale up on her offer of a meeting nagged at me. The more I thought on it, the scarier the idea got, and the more it seemed to make sense. What if I did take them up on the offer? I could meet them, talk with them, see what they had to offer, and all the while fish for information. If I got anything worth sharing, I could just turn around and give it to Armsmaster so he could use it against them. Just going by what Armsmaster had said about these guys and the scarcity of information on them, it would be a pretty major coup for the good guys. Okay, so they would likely see my ploy as a monumental betrayal if and when I pulled it off. I would be making enemies. That said, I suspected that when it came out that I was a hero and not a villain, they would count it as such regardless. Didn't it make sense to leverage as much information as I could from them before they caught on, as far as their misconception went? I turned around and headed in the direction of the public library. It was only a few blocks away. The library was busy, which made sense given the number of offices and businesses around, the number of people wanting some quiet during their lunch hour, and people doing research or casual browsing that they couldn't do at their workplaces. I would have included Brockton Bay's biggest and fanciest high school, the nearby Arcadia High, in that generalization, but I doubted many students were spending their lunch breaks at the library. The central library looked almost more like a museum or art gallery than anything else, with tall ceilings, pillars, and massive pieces of artwork hung to frame the hallways between the major sections of the building. I headed up to the second floor, where there were about 20 computers and a line of people waiting their turn to use them. I anticipated a 15 or 20 minute wait, but as the clock approached 1 o'clock, people were heading back to work and the line rapidly thinned out. A free computer came up within a few minutes of my joining the line. I let the person behind me go on ahead, waiting a bit longer so I could get a station with a little more privacy. By the time I sat down, I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to write. I found a message with the search function and clicked on the username TT. That's one capital T and one small t. Okay, I need more water. I'm gonna admit, I think my vocal fry is quite bad today. But I just spoke too much. Alright. Where was I? Right. Okay. A drop-down menu appeared, and I chose Send Private Message. It gave me the option of making an account, signing in with an already existing account, or sending the message as an anonymous guest. I chose the last option, then typed subject bug. Bug here, would like to meet, but want proof you're a TT. I'll reciprocate if needed. I didn't send it right away, taking a moment to consider. Getting decent proof would prevent any potential problems like the message turning out to be a trap laid by, say, Bakuda. Leaving the burden of proof on Tattletale and leaving it up to her to decide if she wanted verification I was indeed Bug meant I didn't have to worry about coming up with exactly how one might prove their identity. I reread it twice over, then sent the message. The reply came only 2 or 3 minutes later. It was fast enough that I couldn't imagine Tattletale taking the time to check and double-check every aspect of her message the way I had mine. Was that recklessness on her part, or just the benefit of experience? I closed the tabs I had opened in the meantime and checked to see what she had written. It was a private message from her to me, and it set my fight or flight instincts in high gear. Subject: Bug. Proof? Last night you didn't say anything until I asked your name. Big guy had a mess of nasty bites and you pepper sprayed him, and I told my pal G that when he asked. Good enough? GR and me will meet you at the same spot we crossed paths last night, okay? Don't have to get gussied up if you catch my drift. Rest of us will be in casual wear. If we meet at 3, will that give enough time to get there from the library with everything we need? Let me know. Ta-ta. My heart pounded. She knew where I was, and she was letting me know. Why? More to the point, how? Had I unwittingly entered an online exchange with a savvy hacker? I knew my way around computers. My mom had made sure I had one since before I could read and write. But I'd be lying if I said I could tell when I was being hacked or do anything about it. I would have interpreted the casual mention of my location as a veiled threat if it didn't run contrary to everything else in the message to me. Besides, Tattletale was talking about meeting me in casual clothes. I took that to mean they wouldn't be in costume. I couldn't understand why, but at the same time, it was hard to imagine her threatening me with one breath just a sentence after she'd offered to meet me in a way that made her totally vulnerable. Tattletale had unwittingly raised the stakes for my scheme. My primary goal was to gather information on them, and here I was getting a chance to see them with their masks off. It was too good to be true, which made me wonder what kind of safeguards they had in place to protect themselves. I had just had no idea what I'd be getting into. The screensaver came up while I stared at the monitor with thoughts racing through my head. The words Brockton Bay Central Library scrolled across the screen in varying colours. If I went, best case scenario, I could get enough information to turn them in. I'd get mucho cred from the good guys and respect from an international celebrity. If I judged Arms Master right, I'd get even more brownie points if I gave him the info and let him, or helped him, make the bust. On the flip side of the coin, the worst case scenario was that it was a trap. Or they'd figure out what I was doing. It would mean a fight, maybe a beating. There was an outside possibility I could get killed, but somehow that didn't concern me as much as it maybe should have. Part of the reason for my lack of concern, I think, was that the possibility existed any time I went out in costume. That, and from my interactions with them last night, I didn't get a killer vibe from them. Was that a pun? If that was a pun, that was great. The break. Water break. Okay. On the topic of the status quo, if I didn't go, what would happen? This particular window of opportunity would likely pass, as far as being able to get the dirt on Tattletale and her gang. That was okay, as I thought on it. It was a high-risk, high-reward venture anyways. Taking that path would mean turning down the meat, then killing time for the rest of the afternoon, trying to avoid dwelling on the fact that I missed 2 straight afternoons and classes and might, maybe, miss more. It was depressing to think about. Excuse me. Startled, I looked up. A middle-aged woman in a red jacket stood just behind me. As I met her eyes, she asked, "Are you done?" She gestured at the computer, where the screensaver was still scrolling. Heady with the relief she hadn't seen, irrationally enough, Tattletale, I smiled and told her... that she hadn't been. Heady with the relief that she hadn't been, irrationally enough, Tattletale, I smiled and told her, "Give me 30 seconds. Subject, bug. See you at 3. That was good. End chapter, by the way. I think that was good. It was pretty fun reading. Honestly, I vibe with it quite a bit. Whoever's in chat, thank you guys for vibing in chat. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it, guys. Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with the worm reading. Really, I really think I missed out on a lot and skimmed through a lot of the details way too much when I was just reading like on my own. Unfortunately it's not technically a blind reading until we get to like arc 6, I think. And it might take a while because, well, just because reading out loud is significantly slower than reading when you're, just by yourself. But anyways, onwards and upwards. Water break fast. Oh my god. Ugh. Okay. I really think my throat's kind of dying, so I'll try my best. Maybe we can get through. We might be able to finish arc 2. I'm hoping for another interlude because those interludes are great. That would be pretty fun. But if not, I want to at least get through Insinuation 2.6 because I'm kind of curious what happens because I forgot. Anyways, Insinuation 2.6. I showed up in costume. I didn't care if they thought it was rude or paranoid. I would rather be capable of surviving having a knife pulled on me than play nice. I'd caught a bus from the library to my house and put my costume on under my clothes. Most of the armor panels on my costume were separate pieces. held in place by straps that ran into slits on the fabric of the costume. Not all of them were, though. I'd made some of the armor part of the bodysuit. I'd made narrow, rigid sections of armor running along the center of my chest, back, shins, wrists, hips, and the tops of my shoulders, so that when I strapped the larger pieces on, grooves on the underside of the armor would fit over them and help keep them from flopping around. I checked myself in the mirror before I left. I don't think anyone would notice unless I had a strange posture or if they were paying a great deal of attention to what I was wearing. I wore loose-fitting clothes over the costume, one of my larger pairs of jeans and a sweatshirt, and even with that, I felt painfully conspicuous. I changed much the way I had the previous night, finding an empty alley, quickly pulling on my mask, pulling off my outer clothes, and stuffing the clothes into one of my dad's old backpacks. I'd hidden the backpack before I went patrolling last night, but today I opted to take it with me. I headed out the other side of the alley. When I was a short distance away from the site of last night's brawl, I sent a dozen flies out to scout. I focused on what they were sensing. Bugs. It probably goes without saying. Sense things in a very different way than we do. More than that, they sense and process things at a very different speed. The end result was that the signals to my power were able to translate and send to me in a way my brain could understand were muted. Visual information came through as ink blot patches of monochrome light and dark, alternating between fuzzy and overly sharp. Sound was almost painful to focus on, breaking down to bass vibrations that made my vision distort, and high-pitched voices that weren't unlike nails on a chalkboard. Multiply that by 100, 1,000, 10,000, and it was overwhelming. When my power was new to me, I hadn't been able to hold back. The sensory overload that had never actually hurt me, even at its worst, but it had made me flat out miserable. These days, I had that part of my power turned off a good 99% of the time. My preferred method of sensing things was that. I need to blow my nose again. Sorry. I'm just very sick. Very, very sick. Alright. My preferred method of sensing things through my bugs was touch. It wasn't that their sense of touch translated much better than the hearing or the sight part of things, but it had more to do with the fact that I could tell where they were in relation to me. I was acutely aware that when they were very still, if they were moving or if something else was moving them. That was one thing that translated well. So as I sent the bugs out to scout, the 12 sets of compound eyes that identified the trio as blurry silhouettes atop a larger, more defined shadow, backlit by a flare of white that had to be the sun. I directed the flies closer, towards the heads of the figures, and when they touched down the skin, none of the three were wearing masks, which I deemed reason to believe Tattletale had been telling the truth. They weren't in costume. There was no guarantee that the three were really Tattletale, Gru, and Regent, but I felt confident enough to head around the fire escape and climb up onto the roof. It was them, no doubt. I recognized them even without their costumes, 2 guys and a girl. The girl had dirty blonde hair tied back into a loose braid, a smattering of freckles over the bridge of her nose, and the same vulpine grin I recognized from the night prior. She wore a black long-sleeve t-shirt with a graffiti-style design on it and a knee-length denim skirt. Sorry, any description of what a character's wearing in like detail just reminds me of my immortal. Anyways, I was surprised by the bottle glass green of her eyes. The smaller and younger of the 2 guys, about my age, was undoubtedly Regent. I recognized the mop of black curls. He was a good-looking guy, but not in a way that would make me say he was handsome. He was pretty, with a triangular face, light blue eyes, and full lips pulled into a bit of a scowl. I pegged him as having French or Italian heritage. Taking it seriously. I could see where he would have girls all over him, but I couldn't say I was interested in myself. The pretty boys, Leonardo DiCaprio, Marcus Firth, Justin Bieber, Johnny Depp, had never done it for me. He was wearing a white jacket with a hood, jeans and sneakers, and was perched on the raised lip of the edge of the roof, a bottle of cola in hand. Gru was startling in appearance by contrast. Taller than me by at least a foot, Gru had dark chocolate skin, shoulder-length cornrows, and that masculine lantern jaw you would typically associate with guy superheroes. He wore jeans, boots, and a plain green t-shirt, which struck me as a bit cold for the spring. I did note he had considerable muscle definition in his arms. This was a guy who worked out. "And she arrives," Tattletale crowed. "Pay up." Regent's scowl deepened for a second and he fished in his pocket for a wad of bills, which he forked over to Tattletale. "You bet on whether I would show up?" I ventured. "We bet on whether you would come in costume," Tattletale told me. Then, more to Regent than to me, she said, "And I won." "Again," Regent muttered. "It's your own fault for taking the bet in the first place," Gru said. "Even if it wasn't Tattle, it was a sucker bet. Showing up in costume makes too much sense. It's what I would do." He had a nice voice. It was an adult voice, even if his appearance gave me the sense of a guy in his late teens. He extended his hand to me. "Hey, I'm Brian." I shook his hand. He wasn't shy about shaking my hand firmly. I said, "You can call me Bug, I guess. At least until I can come up with something better. Or until I decide this isn't an elaborate trick." He shrugged. "Cool." There wasn't the slightest trace of offense at my suspicion. I almost felt bad. "Lisa," Tattletale introduced herself. She didn't offer me her hand to shake, but I think it would have felt out of place if she had. It wasn't that she seemed unfriendly, but she didn't have the same aura of geniality about her that Gru did. "I'm Alec," Regent informed me, with a quiet voice. Then he added, "And bitch is Rachel." "Rachel's sitting this one out," Gru said. "She didn't agree with the aim of our meeting here." "Which raises the question," I cut in. "What is the aim of this meeting? I'm a little weirded out that you guys revealed your secret identities like this. Or, at least, you're pretending to." "Sorry." Brian apologized. "That was my idea. I thought we would make a token show of trust." Behind the yellow-tinted lenses of my mask, my eyes narrowed. Flicking from Lisa to Alec to Brian, I couldn't draw any conclusions from their expressions. "Why, exactly, do you need my trust?" I asked. Brian opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked to Lisa, who bent down and picked up a plastic lunchbox. She held it out to me. "I said we owed you. All yours, no strings attached." Without taking the box, I tilted my head to get a better look at the front. "Alexandria." She was my favorite member of the Protectorate when I was a kid. Is the lunchbox collectible?" "Open it," Lisa prompted me, with a roll of her eyes. Water break. Okay, I'm good. Whoever's watching, thank you guys for watching and vibing with me here today. Hope it's fun. Like the stream and subscribe if you would like. Thank you. Okay. "Open it," Lisa prompted me, with a roll of her eyes. I took it. From the weight and the motion of the contents inside it, I immediately had a pretty good idea of what it was. I undid the clasps and opened the box. "Money," I breathed, caught off guard by suddenly having so much in my hands. 8 stacks of bills, tied with paper bands. 2 of the paper bands had a number written on an impermanent marker. $2.50 each. Lisa answered before I could get the number total up in my head. $2,000. I closed the box and did the clasps. With no idea what to say, I stayed silent. "You have 2 choices," Lisa explained. "You can take that as a gift, a thank you for, intentionally or not, saving our ass from lung last night. And maybe a bit of incentive to count us amongst your friends when you're out in costume and doing dastardly deeds." Her grin widened, as if she'd said something she found amusing. Maybe it was the irony of a villain talking about dastardly deeds, or how corny the phrase was. She elaborated. "Between territory disputes, differences in ideology, general power struggles, and egos, there's a rare few people in the local villain community who won't attack us on sight." "And the second option?" I asked. "You can take this as your first installment in a monthly allowance you're entitled to as a member of the Undersiders," Brian spoke up. "As one of us." I shifted my gaze between the 3 of them, looking for the joke. Lisa still had a bit of a smile, but I was getting the impression that was her default expression. Alec looked a little bored, if anything. Brian looked dead serious. "Damn." $2,000 a month, I said. "No," Brian cut in. "That's just what the boss pays us, to stick together and to stay active. We make considerably more than that." Lisa smirked, and Alec chuckled as he swished the contents of his Coke bottle. Sorry, sentence structure's a bit strange. I got this. Lisa smirked, and Alec chuckled as he swished the contents of his Coke bottle. I made mental note at the mention of this boss. Not wanting to get sidetracked, I quickly thought through the earlier part of our conversation in the context of the job offer. I asked, "So bitch didn't come in because she was against the recruitment?" "Yeah," Alex said. We voted on it, and she said no. On the plus side, the rest of us voted yes, Brian hurried to add, giving Alec the dirty look. She'll come round. She always votes against adding new members to the group, because she doesn't want to divide the money 5 ways. So you've done this recruiting thing before, I concluded. Yeah. Brian looked a touch embarrassed. He rubbed the back of his neck. It didn't go well. We tried with Spitfire, but she got scared off before we even got to the job offer. Our fault for bringing Rachel along that time. And then she got recruited by someone else, Alec added. Yeah, Brian shrugged. She got snagged by Faultline before we even got a second chance. We've made an offer to Circus too, and she told us in no uncertain terms that she worked alone. Taught me a few new curse words while she did it too, Alex said. She was pretty vocal about how she flies solo, Brian admitted. So you're going the extra mile with no costumes as a show of trust and a cash bonus up front to get me to join, I said, as the pieces came together. That's the gist of it, Brian agreed. Long and short of it is, especially with Lung taken out of action and the ABB diminished by his being gone, there's bound to be some pushing and shoving over territory and status among the various gangs and teams. Us, Faultline's crew, the remaining ABB, Empire 88, the solo villains, and any out-of-town teams or gangs that figure they can worm in here and grab a piece of the bay. If it comes down to it, we want firepower. We haven't screwed up a job yet, but the way the 3 of us figure it, it's only a matter of time before we end up stuck in a fight we can't win. With Bitch as the only one of us who can really dish out the hurt. I just don't get why you guys want me, I said. I control bugs. That's not going to stop Alexandria, Glory Girl, or Aegis. You fucked up Lung, Lisa shrugged as she spoke. Good enough for me. Not really, I replied. In case you missed it, you're the ones who stopped him from executing me last night. That just goes to prove the point that I was making. Honey, Lisa said, entire teams of capes have gone up against Lung and got their asses handed to them. That you managed as well as you did is fantastic. The fact that the asshole's lying in a hospital bed because of you is icing on the cake. My reply stopped before it even left my mouth. I only managed to dumb, huh? Yeah, Lisa raised an eyebrow. You do know which bugs you had biting him, right? Black Widow, Brown Recluse, Moth-tail Moth, Milday, Fire Ants. Yeah, I cut her off. I don't know the official names, but I know exactly what bit him, what stung him, and what the venoms do. So why are you surprised? A couple of those bugs would be fucking dangerous if they bit just once, but you had him bite several times. Bad enough. But when Lung came into custody, they had him checked over by the docs, and the idiot doctor in charge said something like, oh, well, these do look like bug bites and stings, but the really venomous ones don't bite multiple times. Let's arrange to check on him in a few hours. I could tell where this story was going. I put my hands over my mouth, whispering, oh my god. Tattletale grinned. I can't believe you didn't know. But he regenerates, I protested, dropping my hand. Toxins aren't supposed to be even 1% as effective against people who heal like he does. They're effective enough, I guess. Or his healing stopped working somewhere along the line, Lisa told me. By the time they got to him, the big guy was just beginning to suffer from large-scale tissue necrosis. His heart even stopped a few times. You do remember where you had the bugs bite him. I closed my eyes. I could see my reputation going down the tubes. One of the spiders I had been using was the Brown Recluse. Arguably the most dangerous spider in the United States. Even more than a Black Widow. A single bite from a Brown Recluse could make a good chunk of flesh around the bite blacken and rot away. I had my bugs biting Lung in more sensitive parts of his anatomy. Let's just say that even with the ability to heal 7 times faster than your average person, Lung's going to be sitting down to use the toilet. Okay, that's enough. Brian stopped Lisa before she could go on. Lung's going to recover, right? With the look Brian was giving Lisa, I thought she might lie, regardless of the truth. She shrugged and told me, he's already recuperating, slowly, but he's on the mend, and he should be in good working order in 6 months to a year. You better hope he doesn't escape, Alex said, his voice still quiet but bemused, because if someone made my man bits fall off, I'd be out for blood. Brian pinched the bridge of his nose. Thank you for that, Alec. The way you two are going, our potential recruit's gonna run off and have a panic attack before the idea of becoming an undersider even crosses her mind. How do you know this? I asked, within a heartbeat of the thought crossing my mind. When Brian turned my way with an expression like he had thought of something to say to offend me, When Brian turned my way with an expression like he thought he had said something to offend me, I clarified. Tattletale, or Lisa, or whatever I'm supposed to call you. How do you know this stuff about Lung? Or about the fact I was in the library, or that the cape was on his way last night? Library? Brian interjected, giving Lisa another dark look. Lisa ignored Brian's question and winked at me. Girls gotta have a secret. Lisa's half the reason why we haven't failed the job yet, Alex said. And our boss is a large part of the rest, Lisa finished for him. So you say, Brian grumbled, but let's not go there. Lisa smiled at me. If you want the full scoop, I'm afraid the details on what we do only come with team membership. What I can tell you is that we're a good group. Our track record is top-notch, and we're in it for fun and profit. No grand agenda, no real responsibility. I pursed my lips behind my mask. While I had picked up some info, I felt like I had a lot more questions. Who was this boss they mentioned? Was he or she setting up other teams of highly successful villains in Brockton Bay or elsewhere? What made these guys as effective as they were? And was it something I could steal or copy for myself? It wasn't like I was signing the deal in blood or anything. I stood to gain so much. Alright then, count me in, I told them. Okay, this is going pretty well. I'm having a lot of fun. Okay, I think... Okay, we're gonna do one more chapter. Just because I'm actually invested in the story right now. I'm quite invested. But before that, water break. This is great because I'm almost through my 1.5 liters of water. Alright. Ow. I also have a blister on my lip. That's not great. Moving on. Insinuation 2.7. Wait. Oh no. Ah. Okay. Insinuation 2.7. As I agreed to join the Undersiders, there was some whooping and cheering. I felt a touch guilty for acting under such false pretenses. I also felt pleased with myself in an irrational way. Where do we go from here? Lisa asked Brian. Not sure, Brian said. It's not like we've done this before. I suppose we should let Rachel know. But she said she might work today. If the new girl's okay with it, let's stop by our place, Lisa suggested. See if Rach is there. Celebrate the new recruit and get her filled in. Sure, I said. It's just a few blocks away, Brian said. But we would stand out if you came in with costume. I stared at him for a moment, not wanting to comprehend his statement. If I took too long to respond, I realized I would ruin this plan before it went anywhere. Whatever the case, I could have kicked myself. Of course, this was the natural progression of events. Joining their team would mean I would be expected to share my identity, since they already had. Until I did, they wouldn't be able to trust me with their secrets. I could have blamed the lapse in judgment and foresight on my lack of sleep or distraction from the events earlier in the day, but that didn't change matters. I had maneuvered myself into a corner. Alright, I said, sounding calmer than I felt. I hoped. This costume's kinda uncomfortable underclothes. Can I get some privacy? You want an alley or... Lisa asked, trailing off. I'll change here, just take a minute, I said, impulsively, as I glanced around. The buildings on the street were mostly 1 and 2 stories tall, with the only buildings taller than us, Sorry. The buildings on the street were mostly 1 and 2 stories tall, with the only buildings taller than the one next to us being one and a half block away. 1.5 blocks. It says block without an S. With the only buildings taller than the one we were on being the one half a block away, okay, and the one right next to us. There weren't any windows in the building next to us with a great angle for seeing me change, and I doubted anyone in the distant building could see me as more than a figure 2 inches tall. If somebody could see me change out of costume and make out enough details to identify me, I'd be surprised. As the 3 of them headed to the fire escape, I pulled out the clothes I stuffed into my backpack. Armor panels aside, my costume was essentially one piece, with the exceptions being the belt and the mask. I kept the mask on as I undid the belt and peeled off the main costume. I wasn't indecent. I was wearing a black tank top and black biking shorts underneath, in part for extra warmth. Silk wasn't the best insulator on its own. I stepped into my jeans and pulled on the sweatshirt, then rubbed my arms and shoulders to brush off the mild chill. I put my costume in the plastic lunchbox in my backpack. I felt a stab of regret at not having chosen better clothes to wear than a loose-fitting sweatshirt and jeans that were too big for me. That regret quickly turned to a pang of anxiety. What would they think when they saw the real me? Brian and Alec were good-looking guys, in very different ways. Lisa was on a sliding scale between plain and pretty, more pretty than not. My own scale of attractiveness, by contrast, put me somewhere on a scale that ranged from nerd to plain. My opinion on where I fit on that scale changed depending on the mood I was in when I was looking in the mirror. They were cool, confident, assured people. I was me. I stopped myself before I could get worked up. I wasn't regular old Taylor here. In the here and now, I was the girl who had put Lung in the hospital, accidental as it was. I was the girl who was going undercover to try and get the details on a particularly persistent gang of supervillains. I was, until I came up with a better name to go by, Bug, the girl the Undersiders wanted on their team. If I said I made my way down the fire escape filled to the brim of confidence, I'd be lying. That said, I still managed to hype myself up enough to get me down the ladder, mask still on, costume in my bag. I stood before them, glanced around to make sure nobody else was around, then pulled off my mask. I had a terrifying few heartbeats where I was half blind, their facial features just smudges, before I put on the glasses I'd had in my bag. "Hi," I said, lamely, using my fingers to comb my hair back into order. I guess it wouldn't work if you kept calling me Bug or New Girl. I'm Taylor. Using my real name was a big gamble on my part. I was afraid it would be like another thing where water. Good news is I'm drinking a lot of water, which is good. Bad news is I need to drink a lot of water because my voice. Anyways, I was afraid it would be another thing I'd be kicking myself for 5 minutes from now, much like the realization that I'd have to go uncostumed. I rationalized it by telling myself that I was already in this wholesale. Being truthful about one thing might as well save my hide if any of them decided to do some digging on me, or if I ran into someone I knew while in their company. I hoped that by the time this whole thing was over, I could maybe pull some strings with someone like Armsmaster and avoid having them leak my real name. Not impossible to imagine, given the level of security around some of the prisons they had for criminal parahumans. In any event, I would cross that bridge when I got to it. Alec offered the slightest roll of his eyes as I introduced myself, while Brian just grinned. Lisa, though, put one of her arms around my shoulders and gave me a one-armed squeeze of a hug. She was a little older than I was, so she was just tall enough to be at the perfect height to do it. What caught me off guard was how nice the gesture felt, like I'd been needing a hug from someone who wasn't my dad for a long time. We walked deeper into the docks as a group. While I lived on the periphery of the area my entire life, and while most people would say the neighborhood I lived in was part of the docks, I'd never really been in the areas that gave this part of the city such a bad reputation. At least, I hadn't if I discounted last night, and it'd been dark then. It wasn't an area that had been kept up, and kind of gave off an impression of a ghost town, or what a city might look like if war disaster forced people to abandon it for a few years. Grass and weeds grew between slats in the sidewalk, and the road had potholes you could hide a cat in. And the buildings were all faded, consisting of peeling paint, cracked mortar, and rusty metal. The desaturated colours of the buildings were contrasted by splashes of vividly coloured graffiti. As we passed what had once been a main road for the trucks travelling between the warehouses and the docks, I saw a row of power lines without wires stretching between them. At one point, weeds had crawled most of the way up the poles, only to wither and die at some point. Now, each of the poles had a mess of dead brown plants hanging off them. There were people too, though not too many were out and about. There were those you expected, like a homeless bag lady with a grocery cart and a shirtless old man with a beard nearby to his navel, collecting bottles and cans from a dumpster. There were others that surprised me. I saw a woman that looked surprisingly normal, in clothes that weren't shabby enough to draw attention, herding 4 near-identical infant children into a factory building with a faded sign. I wondered if they were living there, or if the mom was working there and just couldn't do anything with her kids but bring them with her. We passed a 20-something artist and his girlfriend, sitting on a sidewalk with paintings propped up around them. The girl waved at Lisa as we walked by, and Lisa waved back. Our destination was a red brick factory with a massive sliding metal door locked shut by the coil of a chain. Both the chain and the door had rusted so much that I expected that neither offered any use. The size of the door and the broadness of the driveway made me think that large trucks or small boats would have been backed up through the alleyway in the factory's English is a language I speak. The size of the door and the broadness of the driveway made me think that large trucks or small boats would have been backed up through the entryway back in the factory's heyday. The building itself was large, stretching nearly half the block, 2 or 3 stories tall. The background of the sign at the top of the building had faded from red to a pale orange pink, but I could make out the white bold letters that read Redmond Welding. Brian led us through a small door in the side of the building, rather than the big rusted one. The interior was dark, lit by only rows of dusty windows near the ceiling. I could make out what had been massive machines and treadmills prior to being stripped to their bare bones. Cheeks covered most of the empty and rusted husks. Seeing the cobwebs, I reached out with my power and felt bugs throughout. Nobody had been active in here for a long time. Come on, Brian urged me. I looked back and saw he was halfway up a spiral staircase in the corner. I headed up after him. After seeing the desolation of the first floor, seeing the second floor was a shock. It was a loft, and the contrast was startling. The exterior walls were red brick. There was no ceiling beyond the roof and a skeleton of metal girders overhead to support it. In terms of general area, the loft seemed to have 3 sections, though it was hard to define because it was such an open layout. The staircase opened up into what I would have termed the living room, though the one room alone had nearly as much floor space as the ground floor of my house did. The space was divided by 2 couches, which were set at right angles from one another, both facing a coffee table and one of the largest television sets I'd ever seen. Below the television were half a dozen video game consoles, a DVD player, and 1 or 2 machines I didn't recognize. I suppose there might have been a TiVo, though I'd never seen one. Speakers larger than the TVs my dad and I had at home sat on either side of the whole setup. Behind the couches were tables, some open space with rugs and shelves set against the walls. The shelves were only half filled with books and magazines, while the rest of the shelf space was filled with odds and ends ranging from a discarded shoe to candles. The second section was a collection of rooms. It was hard to label them as such though because they were more like cubicles, 3 against each wall and a hallway between them. They were a fair size, and there were 6 doors. But the walls of each room were only 8 or so feet tall, not reaching all the way up to the roof. 3 of the doors had artwork spray painted on them. The first door had a crown done in a dramatic graffiti style. The second door had a white silhouette of a man and a woman against a blue background, mimicking the men's and women's bathroom signs that were so common. The third had a girl's face with puckered lips. I wonder what the story was there. Nice art, I said, pointing at the door with the crown on it, feeling kinda dumb for making it the first thing I'd said as I entered the room. Thanks, Alec replied. I guess it meant that it was his work. I took another second to look around. At the far end of the loft, the last of the 3 sections had a large table and some cabinets. Though I couldn't take it a better look without crossing the whole loft, I gathered that their kitchen was in the far end of the loft. Throughout, there was mess. I felt almost rude for paying attention to it, but there were pizza boxes piled on one side of the tables, 2 dirty plates on the coffee table in front of the couch, and some clothes draped over the back of one of the couches. I saw pop cans, or maybe beer cans, stacked in a pyramid on the table in the far room. It wasn't so messy I thought it was offensive though. It was a mess that made a statement, like, this is our space. No adult supervision here. I'm jealous, I admitted, meaning it. Dork, Alex said. What are you jealous for? I meant it's cool, I protested, a touch defensively. Lisa spoke before Alec could reply. I think what Alec means is that this is your place now too. This is the team's place. And you're a member of the team now. Oh, I said, feeling dumb. Lisa and Alec headed to the living room while Brian walked off to the far end of the loft. While Lisa gestured for me to follow, I did. Alec lay down, taking up an entire couch, so I sat on the opposite end of the couch from Lisa. The rooms, Lisa said, far side, in order of closest to father's, are Alec, bathroom, mine. That meant Alec's room was the one with the crown, and Lisa's door had a face with the puckered lips. She went on. On the side closer to us, Rachel's room, Rachel's dog's room, and the storage closet. Lisa paused, then glanced at Alec and said, You think she... Duh. Alex cut her off. What? I said, feeling lost. We'll clean out the storage closet, Lisa decided, so you have a room. I was taken aback. You don't have to do that for me, I told her. I've got a place. Lisa made a face, almost pained. Lisa made a face, almost pained. She asked me, Can we just do it anyways and not make a fuss? It'd be a lot better if you had your own space here. I must have looked confused because Alec explained. Brian has an apartment and was pretty firm about not needing or wanting a room here, but he and Lisa have been arguing regularly because of it. He has nowhere to sleep but a couch if he gets hurt and can't go to his place. And there's no space to put his stuff, so it gets left all over. Take the room. You'll be doing us a favor. Okay, I said. I added. Thank you. As much for the explanation as for the room itself. Last time he went up against Shadow Stalker, he came back here and bled all over a white couch. Lisa groused. $900 couch and we had to replace it. Fucking Shadow Stalker. Alec commiserated. Brian came back from the other end of the loft, raising his voice to be heard as he approached. Rachel's not here, and neither are her dogs. She must be walking them or working. Damn it, I get stressed when she's out. He approached the couches and saw Alex sprawled on one. Water break. Great, okay. Brian came back from the other end of the loft, raising his voice as to be heard as he approached. Rachel's not here, and neither are her dogs. She must be walking them or working. Damn it, I get stressed when she's out. He approached the couches and saw Alex sprawled on the one. Move your legs, Brian told him. I'm tired. Sit on the other couch, Alec mumbled, one arm over his face. Brian glanced at Lisa and I, and Lisa scooted over to make room. Brian glared down at Alec, and then sat between us girls. I shifted my weight and tucked one leg under me to give him room. So, Brian explained, here's the deal. $2,000 a month just to be a member of the team. That means you help decide what jobs we do. You go on the jobs, you stay active, you're available if we need to call. I don't have a phone, I admitted. We'll get you one, he said, like it wasn't even a concern. It probably wasn't. We generally haul in anywhere between $10,000 to $35,000 for a job. That gets divided 4 ways. 5 ways now that you're on the team. I nodded, then exhaled slowly. That's not small change. Brian nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Nope. Now, how on the ball are you, as far as knowing what we're up against? I blinked a few times, then hedged. For other local capes, I've done research online, read the Cape magazines religiously for a few years, more since getting my powers, but I don't know. If the past 24 hours have taught me anything, there's a lot I don't know, and I'll only find out the hard way. Brian smiled. I mean, he really smiled. It made me think of a boy rather than a nearly grown man. He replied, most don't get that, you know. I'll try to share what I know, so you aren't caught off guard. But don't be afraid to ask if there's anything you're not sure about, alright? I nodded, and his smile widened. He said, through a good-natured chuckle, can't tell you how much of a relief it is that you take this stuff seriously, since some people... He stopped to lean over and kick the side of the couch Alec was lying on. Need me to twist your arms to get them listening, and some people, he jerked his arm over his right shoulder, think they know everything. I do know everything, Lisa said. It's my power. What? I said, interrupting Brian. My heartbeat quickened, though I hadn't exactly been relaxed to begin with. You're omniscient? Lisa laughed. No, I do know things though. My power tells me stuff. Swallowing hard, hoping I wasn't drawing attention by doing so, I asked, like why I was joining their team? Lisa sat forward and put her elbows on her knees. Like how I knew you at the library when I sent the messages. If I felt like it, and if I had the know-how, I'm sure I could have figured out by breaking into the website databases and digging through the logs to find the address you connected from. But my power just let me skip the step like that. She snapped her fingers. And why exactly did you mention you knew where she was? Brian queried, his voice a touch too calm. I wanted to see how she'd react, messing with her a little. Lisa grinned. God damn it, Brian started, but Lisa waved him off. I'm filling the newbie in, she waved him off. Yell at me later. Not giving him a choice to reply, she turned to me and explained, my power fills in the gaps in my knowledge. I generally need some info to start from, but I can use details that my power feeds me to figure out more stuff. I butchered that sentence. Okay. My power fills in the gaps in my knowledge. I generally need some info to start from, but I can use details my power feeds me to figure out more stuff. And it sort of compounds itself, giving me a steady flow of info. I swallowed. And you knew that a cape was on its way last night? Yeah, she said. Call it a well-educated guess. And you knew the stuff about what happened in the PHQ the same way? Lisa's smile widened. I admit I cheated there. Figuring out passwords is pretty easy with my power. I dig through the PHQ's digital paperwork and enjoy a little reality TV by way of their surveillance camera when I'm bored. It's useful because I'm not only getting dirt from what I see, hear and read, but my power fills in the details and stuff like changes in their routine and team politics. I stared at her, a good part of me horrified that I had gotten into an undercover situation opposite a girl with superpowered intuition. Taking my silence for awe, she grinned her vulpine smile. It's not that amazing. I'm really best with concrete stuff, where things are, timing, encryption, yada yada. I can read something out of changes in body language or routine, but it's less reliable and kind of a headache. Enough information overload without, you know? I did know. Her explanation echoed my own thoughts regarding my ability to see and hear things through my bugs. Still, her words didn't make me feel that much better. And Brian added, still glowering at Lisa, even if she knows a lot, that doesn't mean Lisa can't be a dumbass sometimes. Lisa punched him in the arm. So what are your powers then? I asked Brian and Alec, hoping for a change in topic. They didn't get a chance to tell me. I heard barking from downstairs. A matter of heartbeats later, I was standing 3 paces from the couch. 3 snarling dogs had me backed against the wall, drool flying from their mouths as teeth gnashed and snapped at my hands and face. Ooh, end chapter by the way. Ooh, Rachel's back. Ooh. Okay, I'm very excited for the next chapter, but my voice really is dying. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys soon, but for now, if you sat through it, thank you so much for sitting through it. Feel free to like and subscribe. There'll be way more reading to come, and I'm just learning as I go along. Also follow my Twitter. Thank you guys. Bye.